phasing big projects is a very big, it's an opportunity, right? So you don't have to necessarily do it all at one time. So if you have a $10 million roof project, the chances that every square inch of that $10 million roof needs to go day one is probably unlikely. So you need to know what makes sense to strategically phase out a project like that so that you don't bite off more than you can chew, or you don't leave yourself in a position where you have to undo work you've already done in order to tie in a new system or anything like that.
Welcome to the Creating Wealth Podcast, where Kyle Curtin takes you on an extraordinary journey alongside renowned multifamily real estate sponsors and syndication experts from every corner of the United States. We teach you how to harness the power of passive real estate investing and witness the transformation of your wealth building strategy. Let's create wealth together.
What's up, guys? Welcome to episode 117 of the Creating Wealth Podcast. I am your host, Kyle Curtin. I am a co-GP specializing in investor relations and capital raising for multifamily sponsors. Today, we get the great pleasure of chatting with Dan Milinazzo, the extraordinary owner and operator of Real Value Ventures. We're super excited to have him on today. Dan, what's going on, my man? How the heck are you?
Fantastic. Happy to be here, buddy. How you doing?
Oh, I am doing swell, man. Super excited to be able to sit down with you today and jump into your story, man, and what you got going on now. And yeah, super excited to jump in. So to kind of get us started, tell us a little bit about your backstory, from kind of the humble beginnings to where you are now, what's kind of going on, for the near future. The floor is yours.
Sure. Well, I grew up in construction. My father owned and operated a building envelope business, so roofing, siding, windows, things like that. So I grew up picking up shingles and slate when I was a little boy. Picking up nails. I used to get paid by the nail, so that was a bit different back then. And then I went to school. Fell in love with architecture and CAD design, things like that. So I decided to pursue architecture in college. And during that education, I had the ability to kind of co-op with an architect and a building envelope consulting company. And I realized I was more figure it out engineering mindset than drawing really good pictures. So I kind of shied away from architecture and focused more on the engineering side of that equation. And then after I graduated, I was with that engineering firm for almost a decade and put in quite a bit of work there, doing a lot of work in the condo world. And then I went to work for a large multifamily REIT, national, and I supported all their construction up in the Northeast. And that's where I eventually got my master's of construction management. So along the years, I've worn a lot of the hats. I've swung the hammer. I've worked with a couple GCs. Actually did work with a local GC that's in the building envelope arena for a couple of years, and I do projects on my own, and I've done some flip work, things like that. But yeah, I'd like to say I'm pretty handy. So I've been on the construction side, on the architecture side, on the engineering side, on the owner side. I do own and invest in multifamily myself. I have a couple of units locally, and always looking to branch that out and get into other syndications and get a little bit more passive on some, but I also like the active component of some of these deals. So it's kind of it in a nutshell.
Yeah, no, absolutely, man. I absolutely love it. And I always thought your story was pretty interesting, especially from a couple different angles, right? Of like seeing the investing world from multiple different ways, from being an investor yourself, with some smaller multis and stuff, to a little bit bigger multis, to as well as working in that like the REIT space and seeing it from a drastically different angle, in the construction type of lens. I think it's extremely cool, man. You know what I mean? And tell us a little bit about like in the REIT worlds. Tell us kind of like what you did, I guess, like most often? Like, what were kind of like some of the like key, like most common, like a day to day, I guess you could kind of say.
Okay.
Just generally speaking, I guess.
Yeah, day to day was a bit different because I mean I was supporting I think at the max I want to say about 6,000 units spread out across 19 or maybe 20 communities. Up in the Boston area for the most part. I did do some work down in like Maryland and supported some other work down in like Florida, things like that. The company was national, you know what I mean? So we had a pretty good footprint. But my role was everything CapEx, everything below the line would kind of fall to me. And sometimes that translated into property management and maintenance teams on the property not having the budget to tackle some of their maintenance needs. So unfortunately, those maintenance needs gets deferred. I'm sure you guys have dealt with, listening to the term deferred maintenance. It's not a fun thing because when the maintenance gets deferred enough, it eventually falls below the line, turns into a capital need. So it falls off the expense side of the equation, but now it's a capital need and you need to take care of it. Otherwise, you'll be chasing expenses forever. So it's a little bit hard there. But I mean, for all of these assets, again, I was supporting, 18 to 20 different communities in the greater Boston region, and they all had very, very different needs. I mean, we had Class A brand new out of the ground buildings, and we had some C-class properties, some affordable properties, things like that, and very, very different. So every property had its own set of challenges. And it was really presenting the right projects that need to be done at the right time and why. So part of it was on a regular basis, on an annual and a continually rolling basis, was I'd have to inspect these properties and keep a log updated on what the capital needs are for this community. So every couple of years, we do a deep dive PCA, property condition assessment, or a CNA, a capital needs assessment. And we try to lay out the biggest capital projects that should be considered at each individual property. And some of these properties I'd be putting, hey, you need a $50,000 garage door in the next year or two. But then in the same breath, I'd be saying, yeah, at this other community, which is 10 times the size, you need $2 million worth of roofing. So the range of projects was definitely different, and the class of projects very different. But as portfolio, I had to look at that across the plate because it was all one ownership, and kind of look at it in a way of, I know that the number one project at this Class A property might be a $50,000 garage door, but the number one project need at this 900 unit complex might be brand new pavement. And I'd have to kind of strategize where the money made sense to go. So there was a lot of constant moving. And then just out of the blue, you'd get a random insurance loss. Catastrophic loss would throw the major wrench right in the works. And it would be an all hands on deck, go deal with a massive flood or an unfortunate fire, things like that. I mean, we've had water mains break in the middle of a creek bed in the middle of winter, and then having to redirect a creek so that we could get to this pipe, which also happened to run under the corner of a building. It definitely had its own challenges for sure. So it was never the same thing day to day. So it definitely kept me on my toes.
Yeah, no, I can definitely imagine, man. You know what I mean? And I think it's incredible, like how unique it is, like just seeing that from different perspectives. And that actually kind of brings me to a question that I did want to ask you is, like, when you first buy a property, right? Or like the first time that, a syndication is, you close, it's acquired, like, how do you kind of, like step on site, I guess, kind of like theoretically speaking, of like, all right, like what's kind of like the first step to figuring out like what this CapEx plan looks like, and like what are kind of like, I guess, kind of like what's your, I guess, like standard operating procedure in a way of figuring out like what the immediate like urgent items are versus maybe things that you can kind of like space out. Like, how do you kind of like navigate something like that?
So for that, you really need to understand the business plan a little bit, right? So the business plan so I supported a lot of acquisitions and due diligence and disposition due diligence as well. And it sounds funny, disposition due diligence, but I can dive into that as well. But I mean, I supported over $1 billion worth of transactions in the multifamily real estate space. And when you look at a brand new acquisition opportunity, it's hard because during the due diligence phase, a lot of flags will come up. I mean, just like when you buy a single family home, you get the home inspection and the home inspector lists everything, right? Like, oh, there's a crack in the baseboard. And it's like, yeah, that shouldn't kill your deal, but it's something to be aware of, right? So my job was identify everything. And so I would bring a team with me to do the due diligence work. And I would gather all that data and I would look at it all. And it's like, all right, in a vacuum, hey, let's say the worst problem, right? Let's say the property is experiencing active leaks and damage and poor customer satisfaction from a roof, right? That kind of puts that on the high end of, hey, you really need to take care of this. But at the same time, let's say that leak is maybe in a trash room or a back of house utility space. It doesn't necessarily get the same type of attention that you would think it would, but it's a mix of what is your business model, what's your business plan, right? If you're going in and you're going to redevelop, you're going to rebrand a property, which was a lot of what we did. We would go in there and kind of scratch off everything and say, this is going to be part of our brand. So we have to apply our brand to everything. And we had a certain model that we do. So knowing the operator, the owner and the operator's ultimate goal with this property, whether it's we're just going to reposition it and get rid of it in 3 years, or this is a long-term hold core property for us, is going to definitely change what I'd recommend, right? So it's like, if it's a short-term hold, then it's what are the loudest, right? What's the squeakiest wheel? That's where you want to put the attention. But if it's a long-term hold for you, then customer satisfaction is actually going to do a lot more in the driving of what projects you tackle first, because ultimately, if customers aren't satisfied, your loss to lease is going to be incredible. You're going to be like way off market because Yelp has a lot of effect. Google reviews have a lot of effect. So if those are the type of things you're watching, then you have to weigh it. You have to weigh it in, right? So it's hard to say that there's a perfect formula without knowing an owner and operator's business plan on what their position is on this property, and whether it's a quick turn it and get it capitalized again, or we're going to hang on to this for forever. We're going to look at it very differently and put the money up front into the projects that have the best bang for the buck.
Gotcha. I think it makes a lot of sense, man. And I really like that take on it. I mean, even just kind of like taking everything into account and kind of figuring out what the most effective and applicable use of, like the reserve capital or whatever it is, in comparison to like what the plan is, like the length, like the forecasted length of the hold period, just what the plan is overall. I really like that, man. It makes a lot of sense. I mean, even thinking about it on the complete opposite end of the spectrum of like, if you just buy like a 2-family or a 3-family or something, and it's like, all right, like I'm probably going to hold it for like, 20 years or, 10 years, whatever it is. And like how you navigate that on a drastically smaller lens, right. And comparing that to like, a humongous like skyscraper, like beast, you know what I mean? It's cool. It's
when you're dealing with those big type of projects too, there are things that you might not necessarily fully understand. You know what I mean? You get into a property that is a really big property, and what might not be like in your face all the time, right? It could be something that's just a ticking time bomb. Yeah. I can't tell you how many times we've walked into these beautiful big properties and you realize that there are things in the background happening, but hey, as long as they're still performing, we're fine. And then you find out your domestic tank just went, and that domestic tank supports 100 units. You know what I mean? Like, that's not good. When your domestic supply gets impacted by like that, it's not a quick fix. You know what I mean? And it has such long-term impact on your customer. So you have to be aware of if like you have to forecast out a little bit of, hey, if we don't do this project, what's the worst that could happen? Right. And then, weigh that against all the other things. So it's a really extreme example of like a cost benefit analysis, but you have to do it quickly in your head because you don't have 6 months to kind of wrap your head around all the different assessments and all the different things you could do. But it's similar in a way to doing like reserve study inspections for condominiums, right? So I've done a lot of reserve studies where these condominiums might not be 300 units, but they still have a lot to deal with because there's a lot of common area components, whether it's pavement, roofing, shared siding, things like that, or if it's shared utility systems that you have to tackle. You have to understand what the big picture is and what happens if something goes down, but also lay out all the options, because what a lot of people don't really take into account is if we don't do the capital project today, we can just do it in 3-5 years. But it's like, yeah, but are you actually tracking enough on the cash flow side and putting enough away in reserves to be able to tackle that? In most cases, that might not be the situation. So if you're not cash flowing enough, and if you don't put away enough reserves, number one, your investors are going to get hurt by that, right? Because if you're either over banking in your reserves, your investors aren't getting the payout that maybe they want. Or if you're not banking anything in reserves, the last thing you want to do is put a capital call into your investors and say, hey, you know how when we bought this property, there was $3 million worth of initial CapEx we were going to do, but we only took off $2 million? Well, that other $1 million we didn't do on day one, we thought we'd be able to make it up in cash flow over the next 5 to 10 years. We're going to come up $1 million short. Like, what do you do? Ouch. At that point, you have to recapitalize it, right? So whether you refinance it, you sell it, you do something like that, and you make it the next buyer's problem. And then the $1 million worth of CapEx that you didn't do turns into $1.5 million or $2 million on somebody else's spreadsheet. When they underwrite it, they're going to underwrite it much higher than you underwrote it. So you have to stay in tune with any projects that you don't decide to do. You have to watch those projects, because if it's a commodity that is volatile, right? So like roofing products, petroleum-based products, things like that, your roof today might cost you $1 million. But if you decide, you know what, I'm not going to do it, and then the petroleum commodity like skyrockets, well, that $1 million roof is now going to cost you $2 million in a year. You know what I mean? That's not unheard of, especially now with what everybody's seeing with COVID, with the material prices skyrocketing. I mean, I was helping a buddy price up a project the other day. Again, this is kind of where it's not big multifamily stuff. It's a friend of mine that was doing a project, and he's like, hey, help me budget this. And I'm like, yeah, I mean, I know I was paying around like 70 cents a square foot a couple of years ago for this, but I haven't really done that work in a while. Let me just double check it on you. But you might want to carry a little bit more, like maybe carry $1. And when I actually ran the numbers and I pulled up all this info, I'm like, it's $1.30. And he's like, how long ago was the 70? And I'm like, yeah, that was maybe 3 years ago. And it's like in 3 years, material price on this one project doubled. And it's like, and you can't make that up. You know what I mean? Like, you can't necessarily properly prepare for that unless you're watching these things on a regular basis.
Yeah, that's wild, man. And it's incredibly interesting to me, like how much like how that like affects like everybody throughout the entire like ecosystem, like in the entire environment, right? Of like, not having somebody like on your team, that has like a particular knowledge, especially, like as deep as the knowledge of yours, and stuff like that, to be able to see some of those things coming down the pipeline, like, pretty far away, you know what I mean? And how that can impact, exactly like you said, like, oh, like now this thing's an extra, like 50 cents a square foot, and you need like, a ton of square feet or whatever it is. Now there's like a huge unexpected expense. Well, that's going to keep going like up the funnel and, affect like returns. Hopefully there's not a capital call there. If there is a capital call, now your investors get pissed, your investors don't come back. Like it's funny, like it's not funny, but like it's interesting how it all like spider webs, like from the bottom, you know what I mean? Of like having just an incredibly deep understanding of the actual physical construction aspect and the structure and the plan that surrounds that, and just how that affects everybody as a whole, down to the passive investors on the other side of that. It's friggin' incredible, man.
Right. And that's why you have
Wow.
to really have a good partnership with the sponsors of a deal or be on that sponsorship team so that you're not going to make the final decision. You know what I mean? One person, I could tell you till I'm blue in the face, you should really do this project. And regardless of my experience or whatever, there might be other factors at play, which is why I don't do multifamily investing on my own. You know what I mean? So there are other experts involved in the deal that are watching other pieces of the project and other pieces of the business plan. And you just have to be open and aware of what's happening there, because I've been in scenarios and I've known plenty of people like this that are so bullheaded when it comes to this is the project you need to do. And they don't care about anything else. And then you end up talking to the finance guy who's on the sponsorship team, and they're like, look, we're getting debt at this percent. We can raise this much equity. And the way that this works out, our best bang for the buck is maybe let's not do an entire like multi-million-dollar roof renovation, but let's go ahead and do like a 20% upgrade of the units. Let's do a kitchen and bath upgrade and start to push the rents up. And that will hopefully, either put us in a better position to sell down the road, or it will boost our cash flows enough to fund pieces of that. And then you have to wrap your head around, how can we phase it? Phasing big projects is a very big, it's an opportunity, right? So you don't have to necessarily do it all at one time. So if you have a $10 million roof project, the chances that every square inch of that $10 million roof needs to go day one is probably unlikely. So you need to know what makes sense to strategically phase out a project like that so that you don't bite off more than you can chew, or you don't leave yourself in a position where you have to undo work you've already done in order to tie in a new system or anything like that. And that's true for everything, whether it's an electrical upgrade for an entire building or pavement. You have to look at things as it doesn't have to be the full boat, right? But you just have to understand, if you do 50% of $1 million job today, it might cost you $600,000. And you ask, why is it not half the price? It's like, well, there are certain mobilization costs and certain costs that are just inherent with running a project of that size that get baked into that number, so that you can't just divide that number in half. You could divide the scope in half, but your number might not divide perfectly in half. And then when you go to do the second half next year, now it's $750,000. So now you just turned a $1 million job into a $1.3 million, $1.4 million job. And you just have to be able to prepare yourself for what that might look like. And I know it very well, because one of the projects that I just like recently ran through was it was a new acquisition, and it was supposed to be $1 million window repair project. And as we dug into it a little bit, it turned into like a $7 million window replacement project. And obviously somebody missed the boat there, right? So the experts and the report that we had, the executive memo was pushing repair. And, during the conversation, I presented it as well as I could, that we need to replace these windows, but it didn't work in the underwriting. It didn't look very good. And it's like, all right, well, then we should really carry a little bit more, because the repair is probably not going to be the best approach. These are old windows anyway, and you don't really want to spend $1 million, $2 million repairing 20-year-old windows. You should maybe phase out, let's do a $2 million portion of replacement. You know what I mean? And let's see how far that can stretch. And then it was, okay, well, how many more can we do if we can really get some really good financing options for this, whether it's local grants. You know what I mean? A lot of communities have grants when you do an exterior work. So if you have somebody paying attention to that side of the equation, they can go and they can apply for grants. And next thing you know, your $7 million window replacement project that you only budgeted $2 million because you thought it was a repair project, there's a $5 million delta there that, you know what, let's do $2 million worth of replacements on the worst $2 million. And it's not pick and choose, right? You have to be strategic about whether it's a stack of windows or whether it's an entire floor of windows, depending on what you need to access and things like that. And then whatever's left, can you go for certain grants and can you go for certain subsidized support and do those projects? And especially if it's a low income property, there's a lot of government assistance on projects like that, as long as it's approved and presented in the right way.
Wow. That's incredible, man. It really is, like, and it's so interesting, like how like I guess all the like the facets of that, inside of, something that could be like a 5 to 7 to like 10-year project, like all like the strategizing and like, and kind of like testing things out and stuff like that. Like you just mentioned, like, with that window example of like just being strategic of like how much that you're allocating towards something like that. Is it like the best situation for what's going on? Is it possible to be able to test out, that type of thing, see how things go, and then be able to like carry that on in different phases and stuff like that. That's really cool stuff, man. It's nuts.
Yeah.
So that's
really the big picture stuff. But I mean, there's a lot of smaller, kind of more palatable pieces of the physical asset management and the asset management in general that come into play on a regular basis as well.
Yeah. No, I love it, man. I definitely have some more questions for you, Dan. I do want to ask you about your company though, and like kind of how you got started, like what you guys do. I feel like it's a nice transition from like what we were just talking about, as well as, kind of the following, kind of questions that I have for you. What is RVV, man? I'd love to tell everybody,
Yeah. So Real Value Ventures, it's actually a company I've had for a while, where I, outside of working in the big national multifamily REIT space, I was pursuing some multifamily acquisitions on my own, and consulting and supporting other investors in the space. So the mission now is to support large multifamily owners scale their operation, because what I'm seeing a lot in this space, especially over the last couple of years, is a wave of owner operators and sponsors that scaled so fast that they don't have the infrastructure in place to support their continued growth and really help solidify their foundation. You know what I mean? So our mission now is to kind of take some of that stress off the plate of owner operators that are stuck in the grind of asset management, and they really just want to go out and find another deal. And maybe they don't speak the language of the contractor, or they can't really negotiate the right change orders because they don't know what's legitimate and what's not. Right. Yeah. And so there's been this upswell of investors that were very well protected from mistakes because the market just buried all of it. Right. So you can make a big mistake, and then next thing you know, you're raising rents 25%. And it's like, yeah, what mistake? You know what I mean? Like you don't feel it. So my goal is to prevent people from feeling that pain too late. And companies that are growing, but they're not big enough to really bring in an entire in-house construction, team to support those endeavors. I can kind of plug into those systems, educate, navigate, help consult, and guide them on that path. And it can be as simple as like scopes and specifications. A lot of the scaling owner and operators are used to having handshake deals. If they're flipping a 6-family, maybe you don't write a full-blown contract for that. But when you're now dealing with 600 units, you need to bring a certain level of professionalism to the table, because your expectations are going to be much higher. And what might slip on a 6-family could end up costing you and your investors multiples of a loss. You know what I mean? And you want to protect yourself from that. So it's a different level of sophistication when you're running big projects and scaling to that size, and you can't run those projects like you would a 6-family flip or something like that. So sometimes you just need guidance on what needs to be done and how best to do it. So you need somebody to write the instruction manual for you. So we can support with specifications and scope writing to kind of lay it all out so that all of your contractors are bidding apples to apples. Everyone's looking at the same instruction manual, and they're going to tell you what it's going to cost. And then even more, everyone's bidding it, hopefully, on your bid form. whenever I bid a project, it is coming through on my bid form so that I expect a bid to be broken out in a certain way, right? I want to see, 5 line items. I want you to break your price down into these 5 chunks so that when I compare you to your 3 competitors on this project, I can see line by line who's maybe not sure what they're doing and who is a little, overzealous on the project.
Yeah.
And then the next piece from that is acting as an owner's rep, right? So let's say you have your project underway, but you just don't have the time to monitor the project because you have other things going on. You're trying to buy the next deal or something like that. So, we can step in as an owner's rep service where we stand between the owner and the contractor, or the owner and the owner's project management team, and kind of help bridge that gap, right? At the end of the day, our job is to advocate for and represent the owner and protect the owner's interests. And the best part is we're, call it bilingual. We can speak the language of the owner because we also know investing, and we can speak the language of contractors because I own plenty of tools and I've put up plenty of stuff on my own, that I can bridge that gap better than some owner operators. So that then leads into the next piece of it, which is like owner's project management, which is a little bit more hands-on. It's more support in writing the contracts and managing the day-to-day, or at least kind of laying out the groundwork for the day-to-day management, whether it's a site team that's involved, but kind of building the expectations and checking in and holding everyone accountable along the way. And then that last piece that I mentioned earlier is the long-term physical asset management, where that's more of it's not like a simple quick hit, like a spec and a scope. I can write a spec and a scope, give it to you, and we could never see each other again. Hopefully that's not the case, but when you're on the asset management side, it's not a snapshot, right? You can't be a successful asset manager by taking a snapshot. It is a constant evolution in the business needs, in the community needs, in everything. So as the financial and economic world changes, your business plan may change. And do you have somebody that can translate that into what it means for your physical asset? Like maybe you don't do as big of an update on your property this year, but maybe you spread it out a little bit more. Or all of a sudden, I mean, there was a day, I don't know what the day was, it's not on my calendar, but there was a day in history where all of a sudden renters demanded in-unit laundry, right? And I can't tell you, like, of all the communities that I've supported in the past years, a small percentage of them in the past decade, like when I started doing this multifamily stuff, a small percentage of them had in-unit laundry. And then fast forward a decade, a very small percentage of these properties did not have in-unit laundry. You know what I mean? Because it became an expectation of the market. And if you're not aware and you're not tied into the property and the plan long-term, you'll miss that boat. And then you're making a knee-jerk reaction, and maybe it'll cost you more in the long run. So,
damn, that's wild, man. That's so valuable, man. Like it's, oh my goodness. And you're totally right, man. And I can speak to the washer dryer thing from personal experience, because I'm trying to rent a unit without one on site right now, and I haven't gotten any bites. So I can definitely hear you there in a different way. So yeah, I think that's incredible, man. And one thing that I did want to bring up is, like, how do you navigate the dynamic of, kind of like how much, I guess I'm trying to figure out like how to word it. So having like the market's expectations on like the physical, I guess like construction amenities, type of side, in comparison to like the business plan and like the forecasted rents, just kind of matching up, like the sponsors have like the business plan set up. They have the certain assumptions for, those particular rents. How do you come in as, someone that's like, essentially telling them like, oh, hey, like to achieve market rents like this, like you need like, like granite countertops, or like kind of like matching up the expectation, I guess, for like what the spreadsheet says, if that kind of makes sense. Yeah.
So the easiest way to do it, and it is a bit, It's a bit of an older way to do things, but you have to shop your competition. Like spreadsheets can give you so much information. I mean, you can go to CoStar, Yardi, you can bring those big systems and software into your operation, and they give you really good spreadsheet data, right? But if you are niched down into a market, you need to shop your competition, right? You need to act as a prospect. You need to see not just their physical offering, but their personal offering, right? Like, is their leasing team maybe a little bit more friendly? When you walk in, do they offer you water? I mean, it ultimately comes down to you're stealing the best ideas from your competition, right?
Gotcha.
Or as you're going through this, and this is just as true as stealing what's working, is you realize what does not work, right? So if you walk into a property and you're completely ignored, you probably realize that's not a feeling I want my prospects to feel when they walk into my communities, right? So you're like, all right, what not to do? Let's improve upon that. Or as you're going through all these different things, you start to realize there might be a missing opportunity here. And I'll give you a very random example of that is while I was with the REIT, I went through a bit of a training program, and part of that program was to be innovative, right? They promoted innovation and change in the organization. So they always wanted you to be thinking outside the box, come up with the next great thing, because they're a giant REIT, right? So they have more backing than your mom and pops, right? They're not gonna, mom and pops aren't gonna set the tone. They're not gonna test things out, but the bigger REITs are a little bit more capable of taking that risk. So they did. And as part of this program I was in, I actually developed, we had some assets coming on the market in Cambridge, right? And Cambridge is a very expensive market. And we were realizing that, well, I was realizing, it was part of my project, was I realized that some of our units were actually pigeonholing us into a smaller opportunity than we could. The difference at the time between a studio and like a one bed, let's say, was drastic. And with the floor plan of some of these properties, our studios were generous sized, or even our one beds were a little bit more generous sized, just because the way the property landed on this block. So I'm sure you've heard of Murphy beds, things like that like pop up into the wall. In Japan, there's a lot of that. In New York, they start doing a lot of that, where they make such a small footprint feel so much larger because it turns into a transformer, right? Your unit becomes a transformer.
Yeah.
And so it wasn't really an adopted thing in Cambridge. And the project that I came up with was a moving wall that would help divide a somewhat generous sized living room into a temporary or a smaller sleeping quarter, to get better use out of the space, especially if it was a short-term use, right? Because especially in that area at the time, this was probably 5-6 years ago, we were seeing people kind of bring in their parents, let's say, is, you know what, my parents need a place to go. They sold their big house and, you know, wanted to stay with us for a little while before they go and retire down south. So people were accommodating family and extended stays from people. So I actually came up with this plan of this like moving wall, and it was a fun concept. It was a little more on the expensive side, so we didn't implement it. But I actually left the company for a period of time, came back after 2 years, and sure enough, they had found a company that was starting to pre-build these devices, these like structures, and they started putting them into some of the units.
What?
And it's just like, I mean, that is innovation, right? And it was like, I wish I was here to see them implement it, because I felt like it was like my baby. I had come up with that. Now I know I'm not the father of that idea. It's just in our portfolio at the time, it would have been the innovation, and it just happened to be implemented after I left because they found some value in that idea. But the implementation, the way I had built it out, because I didn't flush it out well enough, it was just too cost prohibitive until they found somebody that was able to build it a little bit cheaper, and they started to employ it in a percentage of their units, and then it increased the value of those units. So now they created a new segment of the market in those properties where instead of having a studio or instead of having a 1-bed and a 2-bed, they had this like interim unit where it could be a convertible. So people would pay a little bit more than a 1-bed because it had the ability to transform, but they didn't want to pay a full 2-bed price because it didn't have as much square footage. So it was an interesting idea, but the same type of thing that you see, everyone's going digital now, right? With their keys and their locks. That had to start somewhere. Somebody probably did a tour of a REIT. You know what I mean? A large corporation's property, and they're like, oh, wow, look at this. And they realized, I'm going to go ahead and try that. And in the grand scheme of things, as an organization, as an industry, right, we need companies like the REITs. We need these big organizations to take those risks so that they can make it a little bit more affordable for the mom and pops to start implementing these things. And they kind of get the learning curve out of the way. And then a lot of us follow suit with that. I mean, I happen to own an EV now, and EV chargers became the hottest thing that we were doing in that portfolio. And now it was part of the brand, right? As soon as we do an acquisition, we would implement an EV station. It was just part of it. And then it became synonymous with if that's the type of demographic you're going after, then you know that this particular company, this brand of multifamily product units, that's the way you want to go, because you know that they cater to that type of end buyer, end user. So it's really just, it's a long way around saying, shop your competition, see what they're doing right and wrong, and learn from it. Don't try to figure it all out on your own if you can avoid it, because you don't want to have to spend 10x to learn that lesson when somebody else has already done it.
That's neat, man. Holy crap. Wow. It makes a whole lot of sense, man. It's incredibly interesting, like how it works. Like it's almost like a like circle of life in like an economic real estate type of space of like, the top guys, top of the food chain, highest budgets, biggest buildings, the ones that can actually, potentially have the bandwidth and the capability to experiment without, like, exactly like you mentioned, taking like a huge risk, instead, like in comparison to like, somebody with like a 6 family trying to do like experiment with like a wall, in like a unit like that of their own. And like, if things work out, friggin' phenomenal. Like, you're the like pioneer of the year. But if they don't, it's like, oh shit, like, I just lost, 6 months of cash flow, like, oh no.
Yeah.
But no, I think that's incredibly cool, man. Like, just like the whole like macroeconomic sense of how that type of thing works, and how like the innovation comes about, and like how it kind of comes from the top and kind of makes its way down in a way, and let the market kind of decide of like what sticks and what doesn't, and how you adapt accordingly, as time goes on. That's incredibly
probably
interesting.
the biggest thing as well is, like, I mean, again, we keep coming back to like the smaller mom and pops, because at the end of the day, I'm a mom and pop, right? I have a couple of units, but I don't have like the units of a REIT.
Yet.
Yet, exactly. But the big takeaway to some of that is when you're dealing. So one of the communities that I supported was over 900 units in one footprint. Okay. So it was a wide open property, beautiful property, setback. You had lots of trees. It was a different era of building and multifamily, right? Not these super dense, compact buildings that you have now, but this was spread out over acres and over 900 units in this property. When you have that many units in a relatively small footprint, you are setting your own market in your own little like ecosystem here, right? So you can test things on a building by building basis and a floor by floor basis. I mean, when I underwrite multifamily, when all the sponsors that I know are underwriting multifamily and they're going from like 6, 12, 20 units to like 500 units, they underwrite in a way that is, all right, you're treating every unit the same. So a 2-bedroom is a 2-bedroom is a 2-bedroom. That couldn't be further from the truth, because a 2-bedroom that has a pond view on the top floor should have a premium attached to it. A 2-bedroom located in a building that you just updated the hallway. You have brand new paint, brand new flooring, brand new wallpaper, brand new light fixtures. The 2-bedroom in that building should be more expensive than the 2-bedroom in a legacy building that has like really old and outdated wallpaper and everything like that. So you have the ability to test all of those theories in a relatively protected environment in your own backyard and see what works, what doesn't work. And I think that's what benefits like big organizations and big properties. So I recommend when you're looking at these bigger type properties, for any owner operators out there that are listening to this, is be conservative in your underwriting. But when it comes to actually putting your business plan in place, test your boundaries, right? Pick some buildings to do a full-blown renovation and see, hey, can we really get an extra $50 a unit because we did the hallway over and we added LED fixtures and we did this and did that? Because not only if you change all your fixtures to LED, you're going to be saving on your expense line anyway. And we know that if you save on expense, your NOI is going to be supported, right? It's going to be better for it. And if you increase your revenue, because instead of having a unit that's the exact same price, top, middle, and bottom floor, right? If you can get an extra $15 premium for a middle unit and an extra $20 premium for the top unit, you've just increased your NOI quite a bit. If you have 900 units and you can now say the top third of these buildings can get a $20 premium, you've now kind of pushed your market up a little bit, and you still have product that is in line with the market, right? You'll always be able to keep that in line, but you always have the ability to push that market limit just a little bit because you have so much inventory to deal with.
Wow. That's mind-blowing, man. Holy crap. Especially like you mentioned, like, you know, having multiple buildings in one like in one property or something, man. Like, I mean, think about it. It's kind of like when people do like split testing for like marketing campaigns, like try like different mailers, whatever it is. It's that, but like in a completely like macroeconomic type of way that can subtly, or I don't know what the opposite of subtly is, more prominently, I guess, affect you know, like the relatively comparable type of buildings around you. That's cool, man. Like that's something that's really interesting, is like, wow, like it's such a incredible conversation of like the experimentation while still staying risk averse. And like you said, you know, like if it's something like you know, buying like the more you know, like price friendly lights or whatever it is there, the high LED, whatever it is, it's going to help you anyway, you know, because like you said, it's going to, you know, drop your expense items a little bit, jack up your NOI a little bit. And like, why not experiment too? You know what I mean? And kind of see like how the market reacts to that type of thing. Like that's such a crazy thought of like, yeah, you know, like there's that, like the optimal condition that, you know, you want that building to be in, you know, 3, 5, 7, 10 years down the line, whatever that that term length looks like. But also, like, you might be able to add your own flavor to it and like try some things out and like not be risking like, you know, like basis points of returns to like, you know, try out something. Maybe it'll work, maybe it won't. That, you know, the rest of the market could, you know, follow suit to some degree. I think that's extremely cool. Like the influence in itself, you know, in addition to your deal, but how that could also trickle off into other parts of the market as well. That's neat.
Yeah, and you can't just focus on the top line of, hey, can we increase revenue, because you're going to hit a ceiling, right?
Yeah.
You can't just keep doing, like, if you put a keypad on your door, it's not, I don't think people are going to be paying an extra $5 a month because of it. You know what I mean? It's like, oh my God, I so didn't want to carry keys. Like, there's some convenience factor, absolutely. But at the end of the day, when you look more on the expense side, that really is one of the main driving forces behind why our properties did all keyless entry. Because the amount of time when you actually look at when you go back and you do the historic review of your work orders, and this is another benefit of the bigger organizations, you can track better, right? You have more data to pull from. And I think as smaller operators, we need to leverage that knowledge as much as we can, because they've already done the testing, right? They've already done the split testing of how long does it take to rekey a lock? How long does it take to, dig a key out of a lock that somebody snapped off? Or,
Yeah.
you end up having to change out the whole cylinder and all that. Like when you're dealing with hundreds of units, it's a time suck, right? And if you're paying, let's say you're paying a maintenance tech $30 an hour, and it takes them an hour to deal with all that, that's $30 in expense that unit had. Now you put a keyless lock on there and somebody gets locked out. And if you have a full smart system, it's checking your app and unlocking the door remotely or reissuing another code. And it costs you maybe 5-10 minutes. You know what I mean? So now you're under $10. So you just saved $20. You added $20 to your bottom line. So whether it's an additional revenue or a savings in the expense side, it still has the same net effect of improving your NOI. So you have to look at it from both sides, not just look at the big glitzy, what can generate the most money, but what can save on expenses. Getting rid of carpet and going with LVP. It's not just because it's the fad thing to do. It's because carpets have a shorter life expectancy. And I don't know many people that see a stain in the middle of the floor and they cut out that square and just patch it in. You don't do that, right? But if you have an LVP floor and one of those planks gets damaged, guess what? You cut the plank out, you put a new plank down, it doesn't stand out as much. And then you can re-wax the entire floor and it looks uniform again anyway. So again, it's an expense line, right? It might cost more to put the plank down. You'll get more life out of it, and it makes repairs so much better and cheaper down the road.
Love that, man. And that was actually something that I kind of wanted to pick your brain about as well. It was kind of funny, like how we segmented that into that anyway. It's kind of like the tech side in like today's day and age of like, like the keyless entry. Did you kind of see anything in like the REIT worlds in regards to like sensors and like anything like builds and automation, like anything like that by any chance?
Yeah. I mean, probably one of my biggest projects was improved drastically after a risk assessment was performed. This is I mean, I could give you so many examples of technology saving our bacon. But I'll give you one, which was probably the most like in my face at the time. So we had a building that ended up taking on water from a variety of possible reasons, but regardless, we got water into the basement of our building. Yeah. In this building, we had all of our electrical gear. And this isn't just an outlet, right? This is the entire switch gear of a multi-100 unit Class A property. Yeah. Water got in, right? And it was water getting into a room that was never designed to have water in it, right? So that's not a good situation. And it, of course, happened at 2:00 in the morning. So it was an extremely expensive insurance claim. It was a very long project to put back together, but the benefit that came out of it is after that project was done, I put cameras in this room. I put a leak detection rope around the entire perimeter of this room and tied it to the building's BMS, the building management system. Nice. That building management system was tied to my cell phone. So if anybody like spilt a drop of water on this perimeter line at any time, doesn't matter what, I would get an instant alert text. The front desk would get an alert text because they were 24 hours a day. And there was a process that I had put in place that if you get this text, you pull up that camera and you check if there's water in that basement. You check the panel, it tells you where, because we had it mapped out. So if it told you that there was a leak at 57 feet, you could look at the map that I had created and know 57 feet is on this wall and it's like between two pieces of equipment or whatever it is. So you could really hone in on it, get all that data, and then call the on-call service guy and say, look, we have an emergency, you need to get down here. And then we could hopefully fix it before we ended up with 3 feet of water in an electrical room, right? Yeah. So 100% technology, it was unfortunately a hard learned lesson, right? Because this room was never designed to allow water. And by some chance it did, and now we had to make sure that we put every possible belt and suspender we could on this property so we'd never incur a loss like that ever again. The other technology experience I had that was really beneficial was a new construction, new development building, and we had all smart sensors. We had smart leak detection, so we had water sensors in our AC closets. We had water sensors we had a combination domestic and heat system. So you'd have domestic hot water and your radiant heat being filtered from this one combination unit. So we had a water sensor in there. And our laundry machines also had a water sensor that would trip, so that if water hit that pan, it would shut the power off and it would shut the water off to the laundry machine. Nice. So let's say a hose blew out the back of your washing machine, it hit that sensor would automatically shut the power down and shut the water off to the laundry to make sure that you didn't continue to flood out that unit. So in a new construction building, having all those systems operated, we found all of the air conditioners that were not operating properly, because we also had smart thermostats. And I could pull up a report, and I'd set my parameter and say, what units have over 60% humidity right now? And I'd pull it up and be like, oh, okay, crap. Like there's a handful of units that are 60% humid or more. So we could then target those units, go up to the roof, check the rooftop units. We found like shorted circuits. We found wires that were chewed through by pests, things like that. So we could troubleshoot all that stuff without waiting for it to be a service call from a tenant, right? And as a vacant building, we could also control our utility costs by turning up and turning down the units, turning on and turning off the lights as we needed to make things, work for us, so that we weren't just drawing energy in a vacant property. Because when you have over 100 units and you forget to turn the light off of 100 units, it adds up. And if you have a vacant building, that's your expense, and that can be pretty expensive. And if you have an air conditioning unit that is continually trying to cool a room that is overly humid, and then you find out that your condensate pump is completely failed and it's somehow bypassed the system, or we found situations where the water sensor, because it was so sensitive, if the water sensor tripped, it would shut down the condenser, right? So you wouldn't get any cooling effect at all. And other conditions during construction, that water sensor maybe landed on a piece of debris tucked in this closet, and we didn't know that. So we wouldn't find out that the sensor would trip until there was 3 inches of water in this closet. And when 3 inches of water shows up in a HVAC closet, your drywall is now saturated and been saturated for a while. We didn't catch it till maybe the next day because somebody had elevated this sensor. So we didn't get it until it was too high. And it had gone a couple of days in hot conditions, in dark conditions, in wet conditions. We'd have mold running rampant. So we'd have to go in and do all sorts of cutting of a brand new building, which is not fun. So yes, technology has saved us on numerous occasions. But it comes at a price. You know what I mean? It is expensive to implement. But it does help give you the data that you need to make the right decisions.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's extremely cool, man, especially kind of coming from that part of the trade a little bit. So I definitely hear you when it comes to, kind of like the Johnson controls and, some of the BAS and stuff like that. And yeah, no, it's incredibly powerful, man. Like even like our whole entire conversation, one of the like kind of common variables is like just how differently like you can operate in terms of like people and systems at a much higher level, in like the syndication world and, and above, in comparison to like, smaller, like commercial, residential multis, stuff like that. It's, it really is incredible, man. You know what I mean? Like, cause I mean, like, you're not going to be able to put, like a, like JCI, system in a 6 family, with like actuators and like all this like crazy stuff going on, you know what I mean? But, in like a huge building, like you said, I mean, you're going to be able to pull up like the trends of like certain things going on and like really be able to hone in. And, there's probably going to be some sort of role, associated to, checking that data, trying to give solutions, that type of thing. A lot more like, capital and bandwidth to be able to leverage to optimize, those particular properties the best that they can. It's
yeah, but even taking it to a personal level, right? I mean, imagine the customer experience, and that's what this technology frees up, right? It frees up your service team or your property management team to focus on the customer at the end of the day.
Yep.
Now, imagine the experience of a tenant, of a resident, that they experience water coming out of their water heater closet, and it's now damaged their brand new shoes that are on the floor right there, or a package of like family pictures. They're going to call you in a certain emotional state. Okay. Now imagine the experience when you get the alert that there's a drip of water in that closet, and you proactively go there and say, hey, I just got to check something. We got a little alert. You stop that catastrophe from ever happening. Imagine the communication between the tenant. You know what I mean? It's just, it just changes the dynamic completely. And in today's day and age, customer service is an amenity that's hard to put a dollar value on, but it is important for the life expectancy of your organization and your community. You know what I mean? Your reputation. If you are constantly getting 5-star reviews, then don't you think that property would be a little bit more open to, hey, we got to charge you a little bit more because you're getting white glove service? And smiling at your customers walking down the hallway and knowing your customers' pets' names, things like that. You don't really get that opportunity when you're dealing with a very high need value add property and you don't have any of these types of technology in place, or you have a really fully stretched service team. And they don't want to really be friendly with anybody. They just want to do their job, because as soon as they take a breath, they finish that job, they take a good breath, guess what? The dishwasher just went in unit 25B. Yep. You know what I mean? So it's like, it's a constant battle, and it doesn't allow you to prepare and have your stuff in line. And I mean, even on the technology side, when you have a big enough property and you have inventory, right? You should keep inventory on hand, so you're not running to Home Depot to grab a piece of pipe that you need. And you can start building inventory systems in place and have big companies like HD Supply, who I'm a big fan of. I have a lot of good connections over there. They can come in and they build this inventory system for you, where you tell them, hey, at any given time, I need to have 3 of these, no matter what. And they come in, they scan your systems, and they're like, oh, we only have 2 of those elbows, so I got to get 1 on order for you. And they handle your inventory management. You know what I mean? And it's like, hey, we told you we needed a minimum of 3. You looked at the box, there was only 2. And then you just automatically ship me a box and we just put them away. So yeah, there's definitely ways to leverage that to benefit you guys as benefit all of us as operators. Once you know where you start to have those leaks in the organization, in the system, it's like, I really want to take some time and some energy sap away from my service team. Great. Look at where they spend their time. Now, what technology can you implement to make that better? Or, I mean, laundry units, for God's sakes. I mean, we personally know people that have pictures of them taking 300, 400 pounds of coins out of laundry machines. You know what I mean? And it's like, there are more efficient ways. I can't tell you the stories I'd hear from these people, like the service managers on some of these properties. And like, I remember we'd have a guy that comes in here with a station wagon. He'd go building to building, collecting all the coins. And by the time he left, his station wagon was grinding on the road, trying to go to the bank. And I mean, just a simple application of like rechargeable cards, you know what I mean? And you now have cashless laundry. And it just takes so much energy and effort away from the site team to now give them their time and energy back to focus on customer service, which will help drive your property value that much more. So again, I'm not all about nuts and bolts. I've been around enough to tell you that at the end of the day, personal interaction can actually generate more revenue for you.
I love that, man. That's freaking golden. Dan, thank you so much for coming on here, man. This was absolutely awesome. Guys, I definitely recommend like listening to that again and really like just soaking in like all of that information. There is so many friggin' nuggets in there. Like my head's spinning right now. Like I'm not gonna sleep tonight. Like, it just is.
Sorry, I know I talk fast, and I'm passionate about it, so I love talking about it. So if you need me to slow it down or play it at 0.75 speed or something like that, or you just reach out to me. I'll be happy to talk about it over and over again.
Exactly. Absolutely, man. And that was the other thing I wanted to ask is where on social media can you be reached? Like, where can people get in touch with Real Value Ventures? Everything you want I'll tag down below.
Real Value Dan is my handle on just about everything. So it's, on Facebook and Instagram, it's realvalue.dan. On LinkedIn and YouTube, it's just Real Value Dan, no dots, all one word. You Google that, you'll probably find me. My webpage is realvalueventures.com. I am not a web builder, so, take it easy on my webpage. I just have it there to have a presence. It could definitely be improved, but,
you're
that's
not alone, Dan.
Yeah.
You are not alone, man. I assure you.
That's a wrap for today's episode. We want to thank you for being a valued listener of the Creating Wealth Podcast. Make sure to visit www.creatingwealth.com to connect with us. Dive into our ever-expanding library of informative blogs. Get access to our private investor portal and explore a wide range of additional valuable resources. Stay tuned for our next episode as we continue to create wealth together.